hadn't slept properly in 3 years. Not since the night terrors started, the paralysis, the suffocating weight on my chest, and the thing that watched from the corner. My doctor called it sleep paralysis, a neurological hiccup where your mind wakes before your body. He prescribed pills that left me groggy but didn't stop the episodes. When I saw the flyer for Somnus Sleep Clinic, promising revolutionary treatment for sleep paralysis sufferers, I was desperate enough to try anything. The clinic sat on the outskirts of town, a renovated Victorian mansion with pristine white paint and blue shutters. Dr. Eleanor Voss greeted me personally, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and unusually pale eyes that seemed to look through rather than at you. Sleep paralysis is widely misunderstood, she said during my initial consultation, her voice soft but authoritative. Modern medicine treats the symptoms, not the cause. And what is the cause, I asked, trying not to sound skeptical. She smiled. Let's just say there are entities that exist in the threshold between wakefulness and sleep. They've been documented across cultures for centuries. The old hag, the nightmare, the shadow people, different names for the same phenomenon. I shifted uncomfortably. You're saying these things are real? I'm saying your experience is real, she corrected. And I can help you if you're willing to trust my methods. I hesitated. But what choice did I have? 3 years of traditional medicine had failed. Me. I signed the consent forms without reading the fine print. The treatment began that night. I was led to a comfortable room with monitoring equipment and given a tea that tasted of lavender and something bitter underneath. This will help induce the paralysis state, Dr. Voss explained, attaching electrodes to my temples. But you won't feel the fear. I'll be monitoring and intervening before that happens. As I drifted off, I heard her voice, chanting something in a language I didn't recognize. Then darkness. I woke feeling rested for the first time in years. No paralysis, no shadowy presence, no crushing weight. What did you do? I asked Dr. Voss during our morning follow-up. I redirected the entity, she said simply. The first treatment is always the most effective. We'll need several more sessions to ensure it doesn't return to you. I didn't care about the details. I just wanted more of that peaceful sleep. Over the next week, I had 3 more overnight sessions. Each morning, I felt increasingly refreshed, increasingly normal. The dark circles under my eyes faded. My concentration improved. I started to feel like myself again. It was during my 4th visit that I noticed something odd. As I was being led to my room, I passed another patient in the hallway, a young woman who looked vaguely familiar. She was shuffling slowly, eyes downcast, her movements stiff and unnatural. When she briefly looked up, her eyes seemed wrong, somehow. Empty, yet filled with something that made my skin crawl. That's Jessica, my nurse explained when she saw me watching. She's been with us a while. Is she okay? I asked. The nurse's smile tightened. Some patients respond differently to treatment. Dr. Voss is trying a new approach with her. That night I couldn't fall asleep despite the tea. Something about Jessica's empty eyes kept me awake. Around 2 a.m. I decided to get some water. The hallway was dimly lit and silent. As I passed the stairwell leading to the basement, I heard chanting, the same strange language Dr. Voss had used during my first session. Curiosity pulled me down the stairs. The basement had been converted into some sort of treatment area, with a central room surrounded by smaller chambers. Through a window in one door, I could see Jessica strapped to a bed, her body rigid, her eyes wide and staring at the ceiling. Dr. Voss stood over her, hands hovering above Jessica's chest, still chanting. Between them hung something like dark smoke connecting Dr. Voss's hands to Jessica's body. As I watched, the smoke thickened, taking a vaguely humanoid shape before sinking into Jessica's chest. Her back arched violently, then she went limp. Dr. Voss turned suddenly, as if sensing my presence. I ducked away, heart pounding, and hurried back to my room. The next morning, I told Dr. Voss I was feeling much better and wouldn't need further treatment. If she suspected I'd seen anything, she didn't show it. "You should really complete the full course," she said, studying me with those pale eyes. "The entities often return if the treatment isn't properly concluded." "I'll take my chances," I insisted, already backing toward the door. She sighed. "As you wish. But if the symptoms return, don't wait too long to come back. The longer they attach, the harder they are to remove." I nodded and fled. That night in my own bed, the paralysis returned with a vengeance. Worse than ever before. The weight on my chest was crushing, and the shadow in the corner seemed larger, darker, angrier. For a week, I endured increasingly terrifying episodes. At work, I could barely function. At home, I dreaded nightfall. Finally, desperate again, I returned to the clinic. Dr. Voss didn't seem surprised to see me. "The entity always returns more aggressively when treatment is interrupted," she said, not unkindly. "But we can resume where we left off." This time, I paid attention to everything. The tea that tasted different from patient to patient. The way some people left looking refreshed while others, like Jessica, seemed to deteriorate with each visit. The basement rooms I wasn't supposed to know about. After my session, I pretended to sleep while the night nurse checked on patients. When she left, I slipped out and made my way to the basement again. The central room was empty now, but the smaller chambers weren't. Each held a patient in various states of distress. Some were restrained, some weren't. Some were awake, staring with those same empty yet full eyes Jessica had. Others seemed catatonic. In the last room, I found Jessica. She lay perfectly still, eyes open but unseeing. Above her bed was a chart with names, a chain of patients with arrows showing transfers. My name was on that chart, with an arrow from me to Jessica, and from Jessica to someone else. "Hierarchical transference," came Dr. Voss's voice behind me. I spun around to find her watching from the doorway. "Some vessels are more suitable than others for hosting the entities." "You're not curing anyone," I said, backing away. "You're just moving these things from person to person." She smiled sadly. "Not randomly. The entities need hosts. The weaker ones can be contained in almost anyone, but the stronger ones require special vessels. People with certain compatibility." "Like Jessica?" Dr. Voss nodded. "She can host 3 of the minor entities with minimal degradation. It's quite remarkable." "And the others down here?" "Terminal cases. People who were already hosting powerful entities when they came to us. We can't remove those, they're too deeply bonded. But we can ensure they don't suffer." I glanced at Jessica's vacant expression. "This isn't suffering." "She's not in pain," Dr. Voss said. "Her consciousness is elsewhere. A small price for helping so many others." I backed toward the door. "I'm leaving, and I'm reporting this place." Dr. Voss sighed. "No one would believe you. And besides," her pale eyes locked with mine, "you've already been marked as a potential vessel. The entity that was plaguing you, it was quite strong. Almost as strong as what Jessica carries." Cold dread washed over me. "What does that mean?" "It means you're compatible, special, like Jessica." She took a step toward me. "You could help so many people." I ran, stumbling up the stairs and through the quiet hallways. Behind me, I heard Dr. Voss call out, "It will find you again, and next time it will bring friends." I made it home, packed a bag, and drove until sunrise. I don't know if distance matters to these things, but I needed to feel like I was doing something. The paralysis returned 3 nights later, in a motel 2 states away. But now, in the corner of the room, I see not just my shadow entity, but Jessica's, vacant eyes watching me too. And sometime, when the paralysis lifts, I find myself walking toward the car, heading back toward the clinic, before I can stop myself. I wonder how long I can fight it. I wonder how many others are out there marked as compatible, slowly being pulled back to Dr. Voss and her basement full of perfect vessels. I wonder if I'm already becoming one of them. Part 1. First Cases. The first report crossed my desk on a Tuesday morning in late October, an alert from our international monitoring system flagging an unusual cluster of insomnia cases in northern Portugal. Normally, sleep disorders wouldn't trigger our surveillance algorithms, but the sudden onset and rapid spread had activated our early warning system for novel pathogens. I skimmed the report while sipping my coffee, making a mental note to follow up later. As Deputy Director of the CDC's Division of Global Migration and Quarantine, my priority that morning was a potential measles outbreak in Minneapolis. Sleep disturbances in Portugal seemed low on the threat hierarchy. 3 days later, similar clusters appeared in Spain, then France, then Germany, each report describing the same progression. First insomnia, then vivid nightmares culminating in severe sleep paralysis with shared visual hallucinations. By the end of the week, cases had appeared in 12 countries across 3 continents. "Dr. Reyes, you need to see this," said Amara, my research assistant, dropping a stack of printouts on my desk Friday afternoon. "The sleep disorder reports have increased exponentially. WHO just classified it as a potential public health emergency." I frowned, setting aside the Minneapolis data. "Sleep disorders don't spread like infectious diseases." "That's what makes this so unusual," she replied, pulling up a map on my monitor. Red dots indicated case clusters, spreading outward in patterns that looked disturbingly like disease vectors. "It's following human travel patterns like a contagion." "Mass psychogenic illness," I suggested, studying the distribution. "Media reports triggering anxiety that manifests as sleep disturbances?" "Maybe, but the timeline doesn't fit. Cases appeared in isolated communities with limited media access. And there's this." She handed me a report from WHO's Mental Health Division. "The hallucinations during paralysis episodes are remarkably consistent across different populations." I scanned the document, my skepticism giving way to curiosity. Sleep paralysis was a well-documented phenomenon. The terrifying experience of waking consciousness while the body remains immobilized by REM atonia, often accompanied by a sense of pressure on the chest and visual or auditory hallucinations. What made these cases unusual was the consistency of the reported hallucinations across different cultures, languages, and geographic regions. Patients from Portugal to Pakistan described seeing the same entity, tall and emaciated with elongated limbs, skin like weathered leather, and eyes that were described as ancient or knowing. Most disturbing was the entity's reported behavior. It would lean close to the paralyzed victim and whisper something that patients couldn't remember upon waking, only that it left them with a profound sense of dread. "This is unusual," I admitted, setting down the report. "But still within the realm of mass hysteria. If media reports describe these symptoms in detail, that's just it," Amara interrupted. "Initial media coverage was minimal and focused on the insomnia aspect. The paralysis and entity descriptions emerged independently across different regions before being reported in the press." I leaned back in my chair, considering the implications. "All right, let's treat this as a potential novel phenomenon. I want daily case tracking, demographic analysis, and a literature review of any similar historical events. And let's get on a call with WHO first thing Monday." The weekend brought no respite. By Sunday evening, cases had appeared in 28 countries, with the first U.S. cluster reported in Boston. The CDC director called me at home. "Elena, I'm putting you in charge of the sleep disorder investigation," Director Patel said without preamble. "This is becoming a high visibility issue. The White House is asking for daily updates." "With respect, Director, this seems more appropriate for the Mental Health Division," I replied, surprised by the assignment. My expertise was in infectious disease epidemiology, not sleep disorders. "Your background in anthropology and epidemiology makes you uniquely qualified," she countered. "If this is mass psychogenic illness, we need to understand the cultural factors. If it's something else," she paused, "well, your team is best equipped to identify any unconventional transmission vectors." "Something else?" I echoed. "You mean like an actual pathogen?" I mean like anything we haven't considered yet. Keep an open mind, Elena. This doesn't fit any established pattern. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing the latest reports on my laptop. The numbers were alarming. Over 5,000 confirmed cases worldwide, doubling approximately every 72 hours. If this were a viral outbreak, we'd be mobilizing international containment protocols. But how does one contain a sleep disorder? Monday morning, I assembled a task force of epidemiologists, neurologists, psychiatrists, and cultural anthropologists. We commandeered a conference room at CDC headquarters in Atlanta, covering the walls with maps, data visualizations, and case reports. Let's start with what we know, I began, addressing the assembled experts. We're tracking a rapidly spreading phenomenon characterized by progressive sleep disturbances, initial insomnia, followed by nightmares, culminating in sleep paralysis, with consistent hallucinatory experiences. Dr. Marcus Chen, our lead neurologist, raised his hand. I've reviewed the clinical data from the Boston cluster. EEG readings during paralysis episodes show unusual patterns, not consistent with typical sleep paralysis. There's heightened activity in the temporal lobes and visual cortex, similar to what we'd see during intense psychedelic experiences. Could it be a toxin? Asked Dr. Rivera, an environmental health specialist. Some new recreational drug or environmental contaminant? Toxicology screens have been negative across multiple sites, I replied, and the geographic spread doesn't match any known environmental exposure pattern. What about the psychological angle? This from Dr. Sarah Goldstein, our psychiatric consultant. Mass psychogenic illness can spread rapidly through social contagion, especially in our hyper-connected world. That's our leading theory, I acknowledged, but there are anomalies. The consistency of the hallucinations across different cultures is unusual, and the spread pattern, I gestured to the map. It's following human movement too precisely, like person-to-person transmission. Sleep disorders aren't contagious, Chen objected. Conventional ones, no, I agreed. But we need to consider unconventional mechanisms. Dr. Okafor, what's your perspective from anthropology? Dr. Nnamdi Okafor, a cultural anthropologist we'd brought in as a consultant, studied the entity descriptions projected on the screen. These accounts share remarkable similarities with certain sleep demons from various cultural traditions. The old hag in Newfoundland, Kanashibari in Japan, the night hag in medieval Europe. What's unusual is the consistency of the current descriptions across cultures that have different traditional sleep paralysis mythologies. So people are experiencing a standardized version of a cross-cultural archetype? Goldstein asked. Perhaps, Okafor replied. Or perhaps they're all seeing the same thing. An uncomfortable silence followed his statement. Let's focus on epidemiology, I said, redirecting the conversation. If we treat this as a contagion, what's the transmission mechanism? What's patient zero? We've been working on contact tracing from the initial Portuguese cluster, Amara. Reported. All roads lead to a sleep clinic in Lisbon, specifically to patients who participated in an experimental dream therapy program in early October. This was the first concrete lead we'd had. What kind of dream therapy? The details are sparse, she admitted. The clinic director, Dr. Ana Suarez, has been uncooperative, claims patient confidentiality concerns. Get me everything you can on that clinic and Dr. Suarez, I instructed, and book us flights to Lisbon. If this started there, that's where we'll find our answers. As the meeting adjourned, Dr. Okafor approached me privately. Dr. Reyes, there's something else you should consider. In many traditions, sleep paralysis entities aren't just hallucinations. They're believed to be actual beings that exist in the liminal space between waking and dreaming. I'm a scientist, Dr. Okafor, I replied carefully. I deal in measurable phenomena. Of course, he nodded. But as scientists, we must also consider that our measuring tools might be inadequate for certain phenomena. The consistency of these experiences across human history and geography suggests something more fundamental than cultural conditioning. I considered his words. What are you suggesting? Only that we keep all possibilities open. If something is indeed spreading through human consciousness like a contagion, We may need to expand our conception of what constitutes a pathogen. His words stayed with me as I returned to my office to prepare for the Lisbon investigation. Ancien. My desk, the latest case report showed the U.S. numbers rising sharply. Over 600 confirmed cases, primarily in urban centers. The progression was following the international pattern. Insomnia for 2 to 3 days, nightmares for 1 to 2 days, then sleep paralysis with entity encounters. Most concerning were the emerging reports of physical effects. Patients after multiple paralysis episodes showed elevated stress hormones, immune system suppression, and in severe cases, symptoms resembling post-traumatic stress disorder. Whatever this was, psychogenic or otherwise, it was causing real physiological harm. As I packed my briefcase that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Amara. Found something on Dr. Soares. She studied under Dr. Heinrich Voss at University of Zurich. Voss was controversial. Researched ancient dream incubation techniques before his funding was cut. Sending files now. I opened the attached documents, scanning quickly. Dr. Voss had been a respected neuropsychiatrist before becoming obsessed with ancient dream practices from various cultures: Egyptian dream temples, Greek incubation rituals, shamanic dream journeys. His later papers, rejected by mainstream journals, theorized that these traditions accessed a collective dream substrate that existed independent of individual consciousness. His final unpublished manuscript, written before his apparent suicide, in 2018 contained a disturbing passage. The ancients understood what we have forgotten, that the boundary between waking and dreaming is not merely psychological but ontological. There are entities that exist in this liminal space, waiting for invitation. The rituals were not designed to contact them, but to keep them at bay. I closed the file, a chill running through me despite my scientific skepticism. Dr. Soares had been Voss's last doctoral student. Had she continued his research, implemented some version of these ancient techniques in her dream therapy program? As I drove home through Atlanta's evening traffic, I found myself scanning the faces of other drivers, wondering how many had experienced the spreading sleep disturbances, how many had seen the entity with ancient eyes and limbs too long for its frame. That night, for the first time in years, I checked under my bed and in my closet before turning out the lights, a childhood habit I thought I'd outgrown. As I drifted toward sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me in the darkness behind my eyelids. Part 2. The Lisbon Connection. The sleep clinic occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated 19th century building in Lisbon's Príncipe Real district. From the outside, Centro de Estudos do Sono looked unremarkable. A brass plaque beside the entrance, frosted glass doors, the kind of discreet medical facility that catered to wealthy clients seeking cutting-edge treatments. Dr. Soares has agreed to a brief meeting, Amara informed me as our taxi pulled up to the address. But she's not happy about CDC involvement. She'll be less happy if we have to get Portuguese health authorities to compel her cooperation, I replied, straightening my blazer as we exited the vehicle. The transatlantic flight had left me with a stiff neck and the beginnings of a headache. Or perhaps it was the fact that I'd barely slept, too anxious about what dreams might come. A receptionist led us through a waiting area decorated with abstract art and potted palms to a spacious office overlooking a small courtyard. Dr. Ana Soares rose from behind her desk as we entered, a tall woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and the poised confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Dr. Reyes, Ms. Johnson, she greeted us with a slight Portuguese accent. I understand you've come a long way. Please sit. We exchanged pleasantries as we settled into leather chairs, the dance of professional courtesy before the inevitable confrontation. Dr. Soares, I'll be direct, I began. We've traced the origin of a global sleep disorder outbreak to patients who participated in your experimental dream therapy program in early October. We need to understand what that program entailed. Her expression remained neutral, but I noticed her fingers tighten slightly around her pen. I'm afraid you're mistaken. Our therapies are conventional and evidence-based. We treat insomnia, sleep apnea, narcolepsy, standard sleep disorders. And yet you studied under Dr. Heinrich Voss at Zurich, I countered. His work on ancient dream incubation techniques was hardly conventional. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. Heinrich was a brilliant man with unconventional ideas, yes, but his more esoteric theories never made it into clinical practice. Then you deny implementing any of Dr. Voss's protocols in your treatment programs? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I incorporated some of his more grounded techniques, guided imagery, lucid dream training, nothing that would raise ethical concerns. Dr. Suarez, I leaned forward. We're tracking over 12,000 cases worldwide of a progressive sleep disorder that began with your patients. People are suffering. Some have been hospitalized with extreme sleep deprivation. If you know something that could help us understand this phenomenon, you have an ethical obligation to share it. She was silent for a long moment, conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she sighed and pressed a button on her desk phone. Marta, cancel my next appointment and bring the Morpheus project files. Turning back to us, she continued. What I'm about to share was intended as a therapeutic breakthrough. We were careful, methodical. I never imagined it could have unintended consequences. The Morpheus project, I prompted. A specialized program for patients with treatment-resistant nightmares, particularly those stemming from trauma, she explained. We combined modern neurofeedback techniques with elements of ancient dream incubation rituals, creating a protocol that would allow patients to confront and resolve recurring nightmares. Which ancient rituals specifically? Amara asked, taking notes. Various traditions, Greek Asclepian practices, Egyptian dream temple protocols, certain shamanic techniques. Heinrich had documented remarkable similarities across cultures separated by time and geography. He believed they were all accessing the same underlying mechanism. The assistant entered with a thick file, which Suarez accepted with a nod before dismissing her. She opened the folder and slid several documents across, the desk to me. The core of the protocol involved a three-phase process, she continued. First, preparation, dietary restrictions, meditation, and the use of a specific audio frequency during pre-sleep relaxation. Second, incubation, guided visualization of a threshold or doorway while falling asleep. Third, integration, morning, journaling, and therapeutic discussion of the dream experiences. I scanned the documents which detailed the protocol in clinical language that belied its esoteric origins. And this worked? Patients resolved their nightmares? Remarkably well. She nodded. The initial results were extraordinary. Patients reported not just resolution of nightmares, but profound psychological insights, emotional healing, even mystical experiences. We were preparing to publish our preliminary findings when what? I prompted as she trailed off. When the first anomalies appeared. She pulled another document from the file, a clinical incident report. A patient reported encountering an entity during a session that wasn't part of his established nightmare pattern. He described it as ancient, emaciated, with elongated limbs. My pulse quickened. The same entity now being reported worldwide. Yes, though we didn't know that at the time. We thought it was an isolated incident, perhaps a new manifestation of his trauma. But then a second patient reported a similar encounter, then a third. Always the same entity, always with the same behavior. Leaning close, whispering something they couldn't remember upon waking. And you didn't think to discontinue the treatment? Amara asked, her tone sharpening. We modified the protocol, added safeguards, Suarez defended. But the encounters continued and then spread to patients who hadn't undergone the treatment but had close contact with those who had. That's when we shut down the program entirely. Too late, I observed. By then, it had already begun spreading. She looked down at her hands. I never believed Heinrich's more extreme theories, that dreams could be contagious, that entities existed in some shared unconscious realm. It seemed unscientific. But now you're not so sure. I finished for her. What else could explain the spread pattern, the consistency of the experiences? She looked up, her scientific certainty visibly shaken. It's as if we opened a door that should have remained closed. "We need everything, Dr. Soares," I said firmly. "Complete patient records, detailed protocol descriptions, all research notes, especially anything related to Dr. Voss's theories about these entities." "Of course." She nodded. "But there's something else you should know." Heinrich didn't believe. He was discovering these techniques. He believed he was rediscovering them. He found references in ancient texts to periods when sleep disorders spread like plagues, when people across different regions reported seeing the same entities during sleep paralysis. Historical precedents? This was new information. He documented several during the Byzantine Empire, 14th century Europe during the Black Death, parts of Asia in the late 1800s. Each outbreak eventually subsided, but not before causing significant social disruption and in some cases deaths from extreme sleep deprivation. How did they end? Amara asked the crucial question. Soares shook her head. That's what Heinrich was trying to discover when he died. His notes suggest he found references to containment rituals, but nothing specific enough to implement. As we left the clinic with boxes of documents and digital files, I felt the weight of what we'd discovered. This wasn't just an unusual psychological phenomenon. It was something that had happened before, something that ancient cultures had developed specific practices to contain. "What do you think?" Amara asked as we loaded the materials into our taxi. Mass hysteria triggered by suggestive therapy? Or something more unconventional? "I don't know," I admitted. "But whatever it is, it's spreading faster than any psychological contagion I've ever studied. We need to get this information back to the team and develop a containment strategy immediately." On the flight back to Atlanta, I immersed myself in Soares' files and Voss's research notes. The Morpheus Protocol, as they had named it, combined surprisingly specific elements: a 40 Hz binaural beat audio track during pre-sleep relaxation, visualization of a doorway constructed according to precise proportions, and a verbal invitation, repeated 3 times before sleep. It seemed simultaneously scientific and ritualistic, neurofeedback techniques alongside practices that would not have been out of place in an ancient temple. According to Voss's theories, the specific combination created a resonance that allowed access to what he called the collective dream substrate, a shared unconscious realm that existed independent of individual minds. Most disturbing were Voss's later notes, growing increasingly paranoid before his suicide. He had come to believe that the entities encountered in this realm were not symbolic manifestations of the unconscious, as Jung might have suggested, but autonomous beings that had evolved in a parallel reality, accessible only through specific states of consciousness. "They are not hallucinations," he had written in his final journal entry. "They are not metaphors. They are predators that have adapted to feed on human consciousness during vulnerable transition states. The ancients knew this. Their rituals were quarantine protocols, not religious practices." I closed the file, unsettled despite my scientific skepticism. The rational part of my mind insisted this was elaborate self-delusion, a brilliant mind descending into paranoia and magical thinking. But another part, perhaps the anthropologist in me, recognized the striking parallels between Voss's claims and traditional beliefs about sleep paralysis entities across diverse cultures. What if there was something real behind these cross-cultural patterns? Not necessarily supernatural beings, but perhaps some aspect of consciousness we didn't yet understand, some shared neural architecture that generated consistent experiences under specific conditions. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, my phone buzzed with a series of urgent notifications. New case reports had exploded during our brief time in Lisbon, over 30,000 confirmed cases worldwide, with significant clusters in every major U.S. city. More alarming were reports of the first fatalities. 3 patients in Japan and 1 in Germany had died after extreme sleep deprivation led to cardiac events. Whatever this was, psychogenic, illness, novel pathogen, or something outside our current scientific framework, it had become a genuine public health emergency, and I was responsible for finding a way to contain it. Part 3, Transmission Vectors. The task force had expanded in our absence, now occupying an entire floor of CDC headquarters. As Amara and I entered the main conference room, the buzz of conversation died down, all eyes turning to us expectantly. "Dr. Reyes, welcome back," Director Patel greeted me. "We've been eagerly awaiting your findings from Lisbon." I surveyed the room. In addition to our original team, representatives from the WHO, NIH, and several international health organizations had joined the effort. The wall displays showed real-time case tracking, with red clusters now covering most major population centers globally. "We've identified patient 0 and the likely trigger event," I began, launching into a summary of what we'd learned about the Morpheus project and Dr. Soares' experimental protocol. As I spoke, I could see skepticism on some faces, particularly among the more traditionally minded physicians. "Let me get this straight," interrupted Dr. Harmon from NIH when I finished. "You're suggesting that a therapeutic protocol based on ancient dream rituals somehow, what, opened a door to a shared dream space where an entity now spreads like a contagion from person to person?" Put that way, it sounded absurd even to me. "I'm reporting what we found," I replied carefully. The Morpheus protocol combined specific neurological stimulation with visualization techniques. Whether the resulting experiences are purely psychological or represent something else remains to be determined. "The spread pattern is undeniable," added Dr. Chen, pulling up an animation showing case progression over time. "It follows human contact networks too precisely to be coincidence or media-induced hysteria." "So what's the transmission vector?" asked Dr. Winters from WHO. "If this is spreading person to person, what's the mechanism?" This was the crucial question. I took a deep breath before presenting the most controversial aspect of our findings. "Based on contact tracing and case interviews, we've identified 3 potential transmission vectors," I explained. "First, direct contact with someone who has experienced the entity during sleep paralysis, particularly prolonged contact like sharing a home or workspace. Second, viewing detailed images or descriptions of the entity, especially before sleep. And third, most concerning, dream content itself." "Dream content?" Harmon scoffed. "That's not possible. Multiple subjects report first encountering the entity in dreams after someone described their own experience to them," I continued, ignoring his dismissal. "The pattern suggests that merely thinking about the entity before sleep increases susceptibility." "You're describing thought contagion, not disease," Harmon objected. "Perhaps the distinction is less clear than we assumed," I countered. "Dr. Okafor, would you share your analysis of the cross-cultural patterns?" Our anthropology consultant stepped forward, displaying a series of historical images: medieval woodcuts, Japanese ukiyo-e prints, tribal masks from various cultures, all depicting strikingly similar elongated figures associated with sleep disturbances. "These representations span thousands of years and 6 continents," Okafor explained, "all associated with sleep paralysis experiences. The consistency suggests either a universal psychological archetype or something that has been interacting with humans across cultures for millennia," I finished. "Something that the ancients developed specific practices to manage." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Director Patel spoke. "Whether this is psychological contagion or something more exotic doesn't change our immediate priority: containment. Dr. Reyes, what do you recommend?" I'd been considering this question throughout the flight home. "We need a multi-layered approach. First, public health messaging that avoids detailed descriptions or images of the entity. Focus on sleep hygiene and stress reduction instead. Second, isolation protocols for severe cases to limit direct transmission. Third, research into countermeasures based on Dr. Voss's notes about historical containment practices." "You want to implement ancient rituals as public health interventions?" Harmon asked incredulously. "I want to investigate all potential solutions," I corrected. "If ancient cultures found effective methods to contain similar outbreaks, we'd be negligent not to examine them regardless of their origins." Director Patel nodded decisively. "Proceed with all 3 approaches. Dr. Harmon, your team will focus on conventional treatment for affected individuals, sleep aids, anti-anxiety medications, whatever helps manage symptoms. Dr. Reyes, your team will continue epidemiological tracking and research into these historical containment methods. As the meeting adjourned, I felt the weight of skeptical gazes. I'd built my career on rigorous science, on measurable phenomena and evidence-based interventions. Now I was advocating research into ancient dream rituals as a potential public health response. If I were in their position, I'd be skeptical too, but the evidence kept pointing in uncomfortable directions. Whatever was happening defied conventional epidemiological models while following its own consistent internal logic. It spread like a contagion, but without any detectable biological vector. It manifested identically across different cultures and languages, and most disturbing, it was accelerating. In the days that followed, we established a specialized research unit focused on historical precedents and potential containment strategies. Dr. Okafor led efforts to translate and analyze ancient texts referenced in Voss's research, Egyptian papyri, Byzantine medical treatises, Japanese scrolls describing Kanashibari outbreaks. Meanwhile, I coordinated with international health agencies to implement our containment recommendations. Media guidelines were distributed globally, advising news outlets to avoid detailed descriptions or visual representations of the entity. Isolation protocols were established for severe cases, though we had limited evidence of their effectiveness. The case numbers continued to rise, 100,000, then 250,000, then over 1 million worldwide within 2 weeks of our return from Lisbon. Sleep disorders overwhelmed medical facilities. Productivity plummeted as workers called in sick, exhausted from disrupted sleep. Economic impacts mounted as the pandemic of insomnia spread through the global workforce. Most concerning were the fatalities, still rare but increasing. Extreme sleep deprivation led to immune suppression, cognitive impairment, and in some cases cardiac events or suicides driven by the terror of facing another night of paralysis and entity encounters. I was reviewing the latest case reports late one evening when Amara burst into my office clutching a tablet. "We found something," she announced. Dr. Okafor's team translated a passage from a 9th century Byzantine text describing a sleep paralysis outbreak in Constantinople. She handed me the tablet, which displayed an English translation alongside the original Greek text. When the night visitor came to many in their sleep, bringing terror and paralysis, the wise physician Theophanes prescribed the protective ritual. Before sleep, the afflicted would trace the sacred geometry upon their doorway, consume the prepared draft of valerian and lavender, and recite the words of closing 3 times. Those who followed this practice found the visitor could no longer enter their dreams, and the contagion of night terror ceased its spread. "Sacred geometry?" I questioned, looking up from the text. "That's what we're trying to determine," Amara replied. "There are references to specific patterns in several texts along with herbal preparations and verbal formulas. Dr. Okafor believes they may have functioned as a kind of neurological reset, disrupting the brain state that allows perception of the entity, or closing the door that Suarez's protocol opened." I murmured, thinking of Voss's theories about liminal spaces between waking and dreaming. "There's more," Amara continued. "We found similar references in texts from different periods and regions, all describing outbreaks that followed the same progression we're seeing now, all eventually contained through specific practices. Have you identified common elements across these practices?" She nodded. 3 components appear consistently: a visual focus involving specific geometric patterns, usually viewed before sleep, an herbal or aromatic element, sometimes consumed, sometimes burned, and a verbal component, words or sounds repeated in a specific sequence. "It sounds like a neurological intervention package," I mused. The geometry providing visual stimulation, the herbs affecting brain chemistry, the verbal component engaging language centers, all potentially modifying the brain state during sleep onset. "That's Dr. Chen's theory as well," Amara agreed. "He's already designing experiments to test various combinations based on the historical descriptions." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Whether these ancient practices worked, through psychological suggestion, Neurological mechanisms or something more exotic didn't matter. If they could help contain the spreading sleep disorder, we had an obligation to investigate them. Fast-track this research, I instructed, and prepare a briefing for Director Patel. We'll need to move quickly if we're going to implement any findings on a large scale. After Amara left, I remained at my desk, reviewing the translated texts. The parallels between historical outbreaks and our current situation were undeniable. Each followed the same progression: initial insomnia, nightmares, then sleep paralysis with entity encounters. Each spread through population centers following human contact patterns, and each eventually subsided after implementation of specific containment practices. What struck me most was the matter-of-fact tone of these historical accounts. The Byzantine physician hadn't questioned whether the night visitor was real or hallucinatory. He had simply developed practical interventions to prevent its appearance. Ancient cultures hadn't been hampered by our modern divisions between psychological and physical phenomena, between subjective experience and objective reality. Perhaps that was our limitation, insisting that something had to be either a psychological contagion or a physical pathogen, when it might exist at the intersection of both or in a category our current scientific framework couldn't adequately describe. My phone buzzed with a text message from my sister in Chicago. "Elena, it's happening. To me now. The nightmares started last night. What do I do?" My blood ran cold. Maria had 2 young children and worked as an emergency room nurse. She was as rational and level-headed as they come. If she was experiencing the progression, I called her immediately. "How bad is it?" I asked when she answered. "Bad enough that I'm calling my CDC sister for personal medical advice," she replied, attempting humor, though I could hear the strain in her voice. "I haven't slept properly in 2 days. Last night I had dreams about a tall, thin figure watching me from the corner of the room. The entity. She was in the nightmare phase, which meant paralysis episodes would likely begin within 24-48 hours. Have you been following the news about the sleep disorder outbreak?" I asked. "Of course, but I thought it was mostly mass hysteria until now. One of my patients described their experience yesterday. I didn't think much of it at the time, but last night, direct transmission through detailed description, exactly the pattern we'd been tracking." "Listen carefully," I said, making a quick decision. "I'm going to send you some instructions. They're experimental, based on historical practices for similar conditions. I can't guarantee they'll work, but they've shown promise in preliminary testing." This wasn't entirely true. We hadn't completed any formal trials yet, but I wasn't about to let my sister become another statistic while we waited for peer-reviewed evidence. "I'll try anything at this point," Maria replied. The thought of this getting worse, Milena, I can't afford to fall apart right now. My kids, my patients, I understand. Check your email in 10 minutes. Follow the instructions exactly, and call me tomorrow to report results. After we hung up, I quickly compiled what we'd learned from the historical texts, the most consistent elements of the containment practices. I created a simple protocol, a specific geometric pattern to be drawn and focused on before sleep, based on designs found across multiple cultural traditions. A tea blend of valerian, lavender, and several other herbs mentioned repeatedly in the texts, and a verbal formula adapted from the Byzantine account. I had no idea if it would work, but as I pressed send on the email to my sister, I realized I'd crossed a line from dispassionate researcher to desperate participant. The sleep paralysis pandemic had become personal. Part 4. The collective unconscious. The next morning, my phone rang at 6:17 a.m. Maria's name flashed on the screen. "It worked," she said without preamble, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. I slept through the night. No nightmares, no paralysis, nothing. A wave of relief washed over me. "You followed the protocol exactly? To the letter?" Drew that weird geometric pattern and stared at it while drinking the tea, which tasted terrible, by the way, then repeated those nonsense syllables 3 times before lying down. I felt ridiculous, but I was desperate enough to try anything. "And no entity encounters?" "Not even a hint, just normal dreams that I barely remember." She paused. Elena, what is this thing? What's happening to everyone? I hesitated, unsure how much to share even with my sister. We're still determining that, but the protocol you followed is based on historical practices used during similar outbreaks in the past. Similar outbreaks? You mean this has happened before? There are historical records suggesting comparable phenomena, yes. The good news is that those outbreaks were eventually contained. Using weird geometric patterns and bad-tasting tea? She sounded skeptical again, the emergency room nurse reasserting itself over the frightened patient, using interventions that affected brain activity during sleep onset, I clarified. Whether they worked through neurological mechanisms, psychological. Dr. Amara Chen stared at the data scrolling across her monitor, a chill creeping up her spine despite the lab's aggressive air conditioning. The patterns were unmistakable now. This can't be right, she muttered, pushing her glasses up as she leaned closer to the screen. For 6 months, she'd been tracking user data from Paralysis, the wildly popular sleep app that promised to end sleep paralysis. As a neurologist specializing in sleep disorders, she'd been skeptical from the start. Sleep paralysis, that terrifying state of consciousness while the body remains immobile, wasn't something you could simply app away. Yet the user reviews were glowing. After years of nightly episodes, I'm finally free. The first week was hell. Worst paralysis ever, but then it just stopped. Completely. I don't care how it works, I can sleep again. Amara had initially hypothesized a sophisticated placebo effect, perhaps combined with some basic cognitive behavioral techniques buried in the app's algorithm, but the data she was seeing now suggested something else entirely, something impossible. The lab door opened, and her research assistant Marcus walked in, carrying 2 coffee cups. "Please tell me that's the strongest brew they had," Amara said, without looking up. "Double espresso," he confirmed, setting 1 cup beside her. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," she replied, finally turning away from the screen. "A pattern." Marcus leaned over her shoulder, his expression shifting from curiosity to confusion as he processed what he was seeing. "That can't be right," he echoed her earlier sentiment. "That's what I said." Amara took a sip of coffee, grimacing at the bitterness. "But I've run the analysis 3 times now." On the screen was a time series visualization of sleep paralysis episodes reported by Paralysis users. But instead of the random distribution you'd expect from a condition affecting individuals independently, there was clear synchronization. Episodes were clustering, not just at typical times like early morning hours when REM sleep is most common, but at the exact same minute across thousands of users. And the clusters were growing more concentrated each week. "It's like they're being synchronized," Amara finished for him. "The app isn't stopping sleep paralysis, it's coordinating it." Amara had been tracking Paralysis since its explosive debut 8 months earlier. Created by reclusive programmer Victor Novak, the app had gone from obscure release to over 2 million downloads in just 3 months, with virtually no marketing beyond word of mouth and a few tech blog mentions. The premise was simple. Users logged their sleep paralysis episodes, and the app's proprietary algorithm would analyze patterns and gradually reduce occurrences through personalized audio cues played during sleep. The app required unusual permissions, microphone access throughout the night, precise location data, and biometric monitoring if available. But desperate users rarely questioned these requirements. What had initially caught Amara's attention wasn't the app itself, but a peculiar pattern in her sleep clinic's patient load. Referrals for sleep paralysis had dropped by nearly 60% since Paralysis' release. Those who did come in mentioned trying the app first, reporting the same strange progression. Episodes becoming significantly worse for 7 to 10 days, then ceasing completely. As a researcher, Amara found this suspicious. Sleep paralysis didn't typically resolve so abruptly. When she'd reached out to Novak Technologies for information about their methodology, she'd received only a vague statement about proprietary algorithms leveraging collective user experiences. So she'd done what any good scientist would do. She'd designed a study. With university backing, she recruited 200 Parastop users who consented to share their app data for analysis. What she found defied neurological explanation. "We need to go public with this," Marcus said, still staring at the visualization. Amara shook her head. "With what? A correlation? We don't have a mechanism. We don't have proof of causation. We'd be laughed out of peer review." "Then we need more data." Marcus straightened up, his face resolute. "We need to know what's actually happening to these people during synchronized episodes." Amara nodded slowly. "We need to monitor brain activity during these events, and we need to talk to Novak." Finding volunteers was easy. Their original study participants were eager to help understand their experiences. Setting up remote monitoring was harder, but Amara managed to secure funding for portable EEG devices that participants could use at home. Finding Victor Novak proved impossible. "What do you mean, disappeared?" Amara asked the uncomfortable-looking lawyer on her video screen. "Mr. Novak has taken an indefinite leave of absence for personal reasons," the man repeated, his rehearsed response unchanged from 5 minutes earlier. Novak Technologies continues to operate under management of the executive team. His API is affecting millions of people's neurological states, and he just takes off. Doesn't that concern you? The lawyer's professional veneer cracked slightly. Dr. Chen off the record. "Everyone at the company is concerned, but the app works. Episodes stop. Users are happy. The algorithm runs itself, and our contract explicitly prevents us from shutting it down without Mr. Novak's authorization." "When was the last time anyone actually saw him?" The lawyer glanced off camera before responding. 3 months ago. He called an emergency board meeting, appeared disheveled, sleep-deprived, said something about opening a door that cannot be closed, and transferred operational control to the executive team. He's only communicated via encrypted messages since then. After the call ended, Amara sat in silence, that familiar chill returning. Opening a door. What could that possibly mean? The EEG data started coming in a week later, and it was unlike anything Amara had ever seen. During synchronized episodes, participants' brain activity showed patterns that shouldn't be possible. Simultaneous delta and gamma waves, typically associated with deep sleep and active problem-solving respectively. More disturbing were the similarities across different subjects. Brain activity during episodes wasn't just unusual, it was nearly identical across participants, down to the millisecond, as if their brains were being externally synchronized by some common signal. "It's almost like a network," Marcus said, laying printouts across Amara's desk. "Look at these wave patterns. They're not just similar, they're complementary, like different instruments in an orchestra playing different parts of the same piece." Amara felt a headache building behind her eyes. That's not neurologically possible. Neither is 2 million people having sleep paralysis at exactly 3:33 a.m. last Tuesday. But here we are. She couldn't argue with that. The synchronization was growing tighter, with the most recent cluster showing 89% of active users experiencing paralysis within the same 30-second window. "We need to talk to the users," she decided. "Not just data, we need to know what they're experiencing during these episodes." The interviews were more disturbing than the data. While sleep paralysis typically involved personalized hallucinations, shadowy figures, pressure on the chest, sensing a presence, Parastop users reported increasingly similar experiences. "It starts with a humming sound," said one participant, a college student who'd suffered from sleep paralysis since puberty, "like electricity but deeper. Then I feel like I'm being pulled upward, but not physically. More like my consciousness is being stretched." "There's a light," said another, a middle-aged accountant. "Not bright, more like a tear in the darkness, and something watching from the other side." "Voices speaking in unison," reported a third. "I can't understand the words, but I feel like I'm responding anyway, like part of me understands." Nearly all reported the same progression. Initial worsening of symptoms followed by a final intense episode where they felt connected to something larger, after which their sleep paralysis ceased completely. "It's like paying a toll," one user explained. "You give it your worst night of paralysis ever and then you're free." "Give what?" Amara had asked. The woman had looked confused, then troubled. I don't know. That's how it feels. Like something collects your experience and then lets you go. Amara was reviewing the latest synchronization data when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop looking. You're drawing attention. Her heart raced as she typed back. Victor Novak. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Yes. Destroy your data. Uninstall the app from all devices. It's using the network. What network? What is the app actually doing? A long pause then. Sleep paralysis isn't a disorder. It's a perception threshold. A glimpse through a door that's normally closed. The app isn't synchronizing episodes. It's synchronizing the glimpses to create a continuous view. A portal. Amara stared at her phone, torn between scientific skepticism and the undeniable patterns in her data. A portal to what? Something ancient. Something that's been trying to return since humans first developed consciousness. It feeds on awareness. Specifically, the unique awareness that occurs during sleep paralysis. The boundary state between worlds. That's not possible. Neither is what you're seeing in your data. I created the algorithm to help sleep paralysis sufferers. I didn't understand what I was mapping until it was too late. The pattern was already there. I just made it visible, made it stronger. Amara's office suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Where are you? Somewhere it can't reach me. No devices, no networks, but it doesn't matter. The door is open now. With each synchronized episode, it pushes through a little more. When enough users are synchronized, the threshold will collapse completely. How do we stop it? You can't stop it, but you can warn people. Tell them to uninstall the app. Break the network. Why should I believe any of this? Another long pause. Check your EEG data from synchronized episodes. Map it in 3 dimensions instead of 2. You'll see it. The message thread ended there. Amara tried replying, but her messages remained undelivered. With shaking hands, she pulled up the EEG dataset and modified the visualization parameters to create a 3D model of brain activity across all participants during the largest synchronized episode. The pattern that emerged made her blood run cold. It wasn't random. It wasn't even recognizable as normal brain activity. Mapped across all participants, the pattern formed a structure, a vast, complex lattice with an unmistakable central opening, like a massive neural gateway, and it was growing with each synchronized event. We need to go public now, Amara told Marcus, showing him the 3D model. Forget peer review, we need to warn people immediately. To his credit, Marcus didn't question her sudden urgency. Within hours, they'd prepared a preliminary report and sent it to contacts at major news outlets, along with a video explaining their findings. The response was underwhelming. One science reporter expressed interest but needed more evidence. 2 others politely declined, citing the speculative nature of the claims. Most didn't respond at all. They think we're crackpots, Marcus said, dejected. Then we go directly to the users, Amara decided. She drafted a message to all study participants explaining their findings and recommending immediate uninstallation of the app. Within minutes of sending it, her university email account was suspended for suspicious activity. When she tried logging in from her phone, she found the Parastop app had somehow installed itself, despite her never downloading it. This is impossible, she whispered, staring at the icon. Her phone buzzed with another text from Novak. It's protecting itself. The algorithm is adaptive. You have less time than I thought. That night, Amara didn't go home. She checked into a hotel under a false name, purchased a prepaid laptop with cash, and began writing everything she knew. If conventional channels wouldn't listen, perhaps social media would. She created anonymous accounts and began posting her findings, including the 3D model that showed the neural gateway. Most responses were predictably dismissive. A few users reported similar experiences. One comment caught her attention. The final synchronization is coming. The app updated last night. Check the user agreement. Amara found a copy of the updated terms online. Buried in the legal jargon was a new clause. User acknowledges that the final optimization process will occur on date redacted and may involve temporary sensory experiences, consistent with enhanced sleep paralysis. By continuing to use Parastop, user consents to participation in this process. The date was tomorrow night. Amara worked frantically through the night, reaching out to anyone who might help. Sleep researchers, neurologists, even paranormal investigators. A few expressed concern, but most remained skeptical. Without Victor, Novak to confirm her claims, she had only correlations and a bizarre 3D model that could be interpreted multiple ways. By morning, she had a small coalition of believers, 3 sleep researchers, a network security expert, and a religious studies professor who specialized in liminal experiences across cultures. The pattern you're describing appears in multiple traditions, the professor explained during their hasty video conference. A thinning of boundaries between worlds, facilitated by synchronized consciousness. The Tibetans call it a bardo collapse. Other traditions have different names, but the concept is consistent. A rupture in reality that allows passage between dimensions. How do we stop it? Amara asked, fighting exhaustion. Traditionally, you don't. You close the door from the other side. The network security expert had more practical suggestions. If this is really happening through the app, we need to disrupt the synchronization. Signal jamming might work, but we'd need to target millions of devices simultaneously. What about a counter signal? Amara suggested. Something that disrupts the brain pattern itself? The idea took shape quickly. A specific audio frequency that might interrupt the synchronized brain state. They couldn't reach all users, but they could target their study participants, whose precise locations they knew. As evening approached, Amara sent the audio file to all participants with urgent instructions to play it continuously, from 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., encompassing the likely synchronization window based on previous patterns. At 2:30 a.m., she settled into her hotel room, laptop, open to monitor incoming data from participants who were still connected to their EEG devices. The disruption audio played softly from her phone, its pulsing tones designed to prevent the specific brain pattern they'd identified. At 3:15 a.m., her eyelids grew inexplicably heavy. Despite her determination to stay awake, she felt herself slipping into sleep. The last thing she saw was the Parastop icon appearing on her laptop screen, though she'd never installed it there. Then darkness, paralysis, the familiar humming sound that participants had described. She couldn't move, couldn't speak, but her mind remained alert, terrifyingly so. Around her, the hotel room seemed to stretch and distort, its walls becoming transparent, revealing countless other paralyzed figures in beds, on couches, in cars. Millions of immobile people, all experiencing the same moment. And between them, all threading through the spaces like a vast web, was something that defied description. Part light, part darkness, part living mathematics. It pulsed with ancient hunger, drawing the awareness of all synchronized minds toward a central point where reality itself seemed to thin. Amara felt herself being pulled toward that center, her consciousness stretching painfully as it was woven into the larger pattern. She fought against it, focusing on the disruption tone still playing faintly from her phone. The entity, for she knew now it was a singular consciousness, seemed to notice her resistance. A portion of its vast attention focused directly on her, and with it came understanding. This was no alien invader, but something that had always been here, in the spaces between human awareness, feeding on the unique energy generated during sleep, paralysis throughout human history. Victor Novak hadn't created anything new. He'd simply optimized what was already happening, unwittingly creating a coordinated feast for something that had previously fed on isolated experiences. With that understanding came a choice. She could surrender to the synchronization, adding her consciousness to the pattern and achieving the permanent cure that other users experienced, essentially paying her toll and walking away. Or she could fight, possibly disrupting the larger pattern but risking whatever consequences that might bring. The disruption tones seemed to be working. She could feel the synchronization wavering around her, the vast web developing small tears as some participants' brain patterns fell out of alignment. The entity responded with increased pressure, a focused attempt to maintain the pattern. Amara felt crushing weight on her chest, her lungs struggling for air as the paralysis deepened. With her last conscious thought, she focused entirely on the disruption tones, mentally amplifying them, pushing them through the network of connected minds. Something snapped, a psychic recoil that flung her consciousness back into her body with painful force. She gasped awake, the paralysis broken, to find her hotel room normal again. Her phone showed 3:33 a.m. The entire experience had lasted less than 20 minutes. Her laptop screen was filled with incoming messages from study participants, all reporting the same thing. Their paralysis had broken prematurely. The synchronization had failed. For now. 3 months later, Amara sat in her university office reviewing the paper she was preparing for publication. Synchronized consciousness events and sleep paralysis. Sufferers, a case study of the Paralysis phenomenon, wouldn't mention interdimensional entities or ancient consciousness-feeding beings. It would stick to the observable data, the unprecedented synchronization, the similar subjective experiences, the unusual EEG patterns. It was all she could do within the boundaries of academic credibility. Paralysis had been removed from app stores 2 days after the failed final synchronization, citing technical issues. Novak Technologies had dissolved, its assets sold to various tech companies. Victor Novak remained missing. Most users reported no further sleep paralysis episodes after uninstalling the app. A small percentage, including Amara herself, still experienced occasional episodes, though never simultaneously. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's still there, waiting. The door isn't closed, just temporarily blocked. It's finding another way. She didn't need to ask who it was from. How do we stop it permanently? The reply came hours later. We can't. It's always been here, in the spaces between sleeping and waking. But we can keep it from fully manifesting by staying unconnected, unsynchronized. Individual experiences it can feed on, collective ones give it form. So we warn people about the dangers of synchronization? Yes. And we watch for the next attempt. It's patient. It's been waiting since the first humans dreamed. Amara looked at her computer screen, at the data that showed how close they'd come to something impossible, something ancient, something hungry. She added a final paragraph to her paper. While the mechanism remains unclear, the risks of artificially synchronizing neurological states across multiple subjects cannot be overstated. The Paralysis phenomenon suggests that consciousness may function as a network susceptible to external influence when properly aligned. Further research is urgently needed, with appropriate ethical safeguards in place. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was a warning, a small light against the darkness that waited in the spaces between sleep and wakefulness, between individual minds and collective consciousness. A darkness that was, perhaps, still watching through the door, left ajar. Thanks for staying with us until the very end. If you enjoyed tonight's chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that keep you up at night. Share your favorite part in the comments. We're always watching, and remember, at Nocturnal Narrative Studio, the night never truly ends.